All right, so let's give this car a test drive. We have new control arms, new inner and outer tie rods, and nothing's been adjusted yet. And I can feel already that the steering is way out of whack. So we definitely have some alignment issues here. So let's go into some turns here and see what it's doing. I go into a turn and it stays in a turn. It's not coming back out. I have to kind of pull it back out of the turn. Let's go into a sharper turn here and see what happens. I'll start initiating a turn here. And it feels like it's actually pulling itself further into the turn. Look at that. It's not coming out at all. It's just staying in the turn. Whereas it should come back out. So I'm pretty sure we got too much till I gotta yank it back out. And I'm sure the same will be true if we do a right turn. It's kind of hard to do a right turn in a neighborhood like this. But yeah, I can see like it's not coming out and I'm heading towards the curb. So basically wherever I point it, it just kind of stays there. So this is an indication of having too much toe. We didn't change the camber or the caster, or at least not very much. The control arms could have altered that a little bit, but what we basically are going to play with here is toe. So let's see how bad our toe is. We'll go take some measurements and then make some adjustments and see if we can't get this steering correctly. Okay, another thing that I notice now that I'm on this garage floor that's kind of it's smooth and slippery, the tires can actually if they're scrubbing, they can actually move across the concrete, and you can hear it squeak a little bit. I don't know if it comes up on camera here, but if I just slowly start moving, I can kind of hear it like that. So again, that's another indication that the alignment is out. So anyway, let's go ahead and check and see where we are right now. Okay, so we determined that we have some issues with the alignment on this car. So we're going to do an at-home alignment, and I know that there's a lot of critics out there that say you cannot get a good alignment at home, and I strongly disagree with that. There's a lot of things that you need to know and be aware of, and you have to be able to take fairly precise measurements and set things up correctly. But if you can measure and you have eyes and you can do a little bit of math, you can get these pretty darn accurate. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. So let me go through the setup that I have here, and let me go through it in great detail, because I know if I don't, I'm going to get comments saying that no, you're wrong, you're doing this incorrectly. And so anyway, to reduce these number of comments, I'm going to show you what I've done here. Okay, I got some angle iron here up against the tire. Now, first of all, I know the tire is not really what you want to go up against. You really want to go up against the wheel. And oftentimes these tires, you know, there'll be little waves and protrusions and that sort of thing. And that's correct. And I plan on making a better setup here at some point, but this is what I have for now. So anyway, to verify that this bar is parallel to the wheel here, I'm going to take some measurements using some calipers here with a little plunger depth gauge. So with this guy right here. And I'll go in on both sides of the wheel here and check the depth to see if it is indeed the same. Okay, so right there, we got 0.549 inches. So we'll go over onto this side and let's see what we got here. It's identical. It's absolutely the same. So I'm pretty darn sure here, I'm rest assured that this bar here is parallel with the wheel. So, and then the other thing you're going to probably say, well, this thing's flimsy, it can bend, and it might not be straight. Well, for that, I have a straight edge here. This is used for measuring heads and cylinder blocks and that sort of thing. This is a straight edge that's good down to a 1/1000th. So what I'm going to do is go along this edge. This is the edge that I'm going to measure from, not this. I know that this is more flimsy. So we're going to measure from this edge. And when I look here, I can put a light underneath here and then see if I can see any light coming through the gap here. And I don't anywhere. So this is perfectly straight. So I know that this edge is straight, and I know it's parallel to the wheel here. Equal distance all the way around. So I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side and set the one up over there. And then the other thing, I know a lot of people will put a level on here to see if it's level, and I think that's the wrong way to do it. It would be the right way to do it if the ground that you're on is perfectly level, but if it's slanted, it's not. So really what you want is this thing to be parallel with the ground that it's sitting on. So I have a little spacer here. It doesn't really matter what the distance is, it just has to be consistent all the way across. And you can see that it is. So this is parallel. And so I'll go ahead and set up the other side, do the same thing, and then we'll take some measurements from the back and from the front. And we're also gonna have to be very careful when we take the measurements. We don't wanna take one measurement out here and then another one in here. So I'm gonna go right up against the tire here. And then we'll also measure that distance. I'll go into that in more detail later, but this distance that we measure from here to here is also very important because we're gonna use a little bit of trigonometry to determine our angle. So anyway, let me get the other side set up and then we'll go ahead and take some measurements. You can see I have both sides set up. I'm gonna take a slightly different approach, and it's gonna be very difficult to measure from this bottom ledge. I'm gonna measure from the top, and I did check the accuracy and the straightness of this. And this side's pretty much perfect. The other side is only out 0.02 of an inch. So I don't think I'm gonna worry about that small of a difference. So anyway, we got them both set up. They're the same height, they're parallel to the ground. So I'm gonna take the measuring tape and then lock it onto the other side, and then we'll measure from this passenger side. Before taking any measurements, you wanna make sure that your steering wheel is straight. Another thing to know before taking any measurements, and this is very important, is make sure that the car has rolled in before you take any measurements. If you have it up on a lift or a jack and you just set the thing straight down, the suspension hasn't totally settled at that point, and it will be off. And at the end of this video, I'll go ahead and show you exactly what I'm talking about. But basically, anytime you move the car up and down or make any kind of adjustment, you basically want to roll the car back and forth so the suspension gets totally unloaded and settles. Okay, I got the tape measure here, slid over on the other side. Now, this is real important. You don't want to be changing the position in which you measure. So I'm just going to make sure that the tape goes up right against the tire here. We know that it's going to be the same distance on both sides because we're the same distance from the ground. And then we'll measure the distance from here to here, and we're going to use that that distance in our trig function to determine the angle. So anyway, got looped over here. So now let's go back over to the other side and take our measurement. And all right, so the distance here, and we're right up against the tire here. So we know that we're going straight across, and our distance looks like it's 68 9/16. So let's go ahead and mark that down, and then we'll take a measurement from the back side. Okay, our measurement behind the tire here looks like it's pretty much right on 69 inches exactly. So we'll go ahead and mark that down. Okay, so now what we need to do is measure the distance from where we took the two measurements. All right, so to get this as accurate as possible, we have the tape measure coming through here. And I took a measurement right here. And then I took a measurement right here. So we'll measure this distance between the two measuring points. And this one isn't as critical, but still get it as good as you can. And it looks like we're at 23 inches exactly. So let's go ahead and mark that down. Okay, now time to calculate the angle, or the toe in. And let me explain the math here. So this is before the alignment. We measured 68 and 9/16 in the front and 69 in the rear. Now, this overall distance really isn't too important. That's just basically your track width. It can be wide or narrow or whatever. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't affect the toe. So what we're really concerned with here is the difference between these two numbers. And if you subtract 68 9/15 from 69 inches, you end up with 7/16 right down here. So let's get rid of all this extra and just bring these two sides in and make a triangle. That's what I've done down here. And then we bisect it. So we end up with two angles here. We'll have an X1 and X2, and here's our total angle. But we're going to use the right triangle and a trig function to calculate the angle, half of this angle actually. By bisecting this triangle, making a right triangle, we can use a trig function called sine. So, our total difference here between front and back is 7/16. So we'll cut that in half. That would be 7/32. And so this distance here is going to be one of the legs, the short leg of the triangle. And then you got your long leg of the triangle, which we don't know, and it doesn't matter at this point. And then we have the hypotenuse, which is the longest portion of the triangle, and we know that that's 23. So if we use the sine, basically the sine is equal to opposite over hypotenuse. So these are the legs, and the long one here is the hypotenuse in a right triangle. So we're going to take the 7/32 and divide it by 23. So the sine of that is equal to this ratio here. So I converted the 7/32 into a decimal here. That makes the math a little easier. So we got the decimal here divided by 23. So we end up with this decimal fraction right here. And then we know that the sine of whatever this angle is equivalent to that. So doing a little math here, we'll take the inverse sine of both sides. If we take the inverse sine of sine x2, we end up with just x2. But whatever we do to the left side, we have to do to the right side of the equation. So we need to take the inverse sine of this number here. This is real easy to do with a scientific calculator. So basically, you just enter this number into your calculator and take the inverse sine of it. And then you get your number of degrees right here. So we have 0.54 degrees. Now remember, that's just half of this, so that's just the x2. In this particular case, since we bisect the triangle, x1 and x2 are the same. So we can just multiply this angle here by 2. So 2 times the 0.054 degrees is 1.09. That's our total toe in degrees. Now, the spec for this car is 0.25 plus or minus 0.25. So we could have anything between 0 and 0.5 degrees. So you can see that we're out of spec here. We have too much toe. So what we need to do is reduce the toe, get it into this specification here, and then we'll take it for another test drive and see how it behaves. All right, now we got the car in the air, and just to show you what kind of difference a loaded suspension makes compared to an unloaded, just for kicks, I'm going to take another measurement here between the front wheels, and I'll just show you how much it's changed, and it's pretty significant. Okay, we have 68 1/4 now. So anyway, the 68 1/4, so that's about another 1/4 inch on the front. And just for kicks, let's take it back to, we were at 69 before on the back, and now we're still at exactly 69. So see how it's really weird. So you can't really take these measurements with it in the air. The suspension does some funny things. For the front was off by, let's see, 7/16, 8/16, that'd be about half an inch. So we need to bring each side in about 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 inch total to get it into spec. So we'll try to bring it in a little bit more than that. Now, if we bring it in that much in the air, that doesn't necessarily translate to that same amount once it's on the ground. So we should get us in the ballpark. So we'll go ahead and bring it in a bit like that, and then put it back down, roll the car back and forth a little bit to totally let the suspension settle, and then we'll take another measurement and see where we are. If we are within 0.25 to 0, we're good, and I'll just leave it at that. So let's go ahead and give it a shot. Before making any adjustments to this, I'm going to mark the tie rod here, so that way we have a reference to know how much we've turned this thing. So I'm going to start with a mark right here on the front, like that, and I'll do the same thing to the other side. Now, all we need to make changes here is a couple crescent wrenches. So use the small one here to hold it in place, and then we'll break the jam nut loose with this one. There we go. Okay, so we need more toe out. So what we want to do is thread this thing counterclockwise, which will push the wheel out. If we did it clockwise, it would bring it in more. So let's just, for kicks, we'll do one full turn, moving it out, and then take a measurement and see where we are. So keep turning this until we get the mark that we put on here back to the front. All right, and then we'll go ahead and lock it back into place. Okay, now we'll do the same thing on the other side. And then again, we're going to turn this counterclockwise to push the wheel out. So we have the marks both back in the front with one revolution on each side. Let's take another measurement and see what we have now. Okay, we have 68 and 5/8 now. So I definitely pushed it out. Let's go ahead and get it on the ground and take another measurement and see where we are. Okay, so I just set the car down. I have not rolled it at all. And I checked both sides to make sure that we're still parallel to the ground. And I measured the front and the rear. And this is what I came up with. 68 and 7/8 in the front and 68 and 3/4 in the back. So obviously it looks like we have toe out at this point. So anyway, what I'm gonna do now is just move the car back and forth and then take another set of measurements and see what we get. I bet it changes, and I think this is oftentimes where the mistakes are made that get the alignment out of whack. Because if you just look at these measurements after loading the suspension, it's not gonna be accurate, and you really have to let the thing settle first. All right, so let's move the car back and forth just a little bit to relax that suspension, and then we'll take another set of readings. Okay, roll it back a bit. And forward. Also, this is a good opportunity to make sure that your wheel is still straight. Let's make sure that our bars are still parallel. I'll have to tweak it just a little bit here. Okay. Okay, now we're getting 68 and 3/4. Okay, I just took it around the block and then set this up again. So we actually drove it to let the suspension really settle. And then here are the results. So, as you can see here, when we just sat the thing down, on the front we measured 68 and 7/8, and then I rocked it back and forth, and it didn't really change it. If I had moved it further back and forth, it may have. But then I drove it around, and then we got 68 and 13/16. And then on the back, you can see the difference between set down and rocking didn't do much, but then we drove it, and then it changed almost a 1/4 of an inch. That's pretty significant just because we drove it. And I think a lot of alignments, this is where they go wrong. I mean, you take all these accurate measurements, but you don't allow the suspension to settle. So anyway, after doing the math again, so we have a total toe-in of 0.16 degrees. All right, so let's take it out, do another run, and see if it behaves any differently. I can already feel that the wheel is easier to turn. Okay. Looks like the wheel does start to come back a bit. We'll get into a tight turn here and see if it pulls itself out. Ah, look at that. Big difference. So I'll go into the tightest turn I can and see if we can get out of it. Okay, there it is, fully locked. And it comes out. So now we are within spec and it behaves fine. It's much easier to turn the wheel. I think we're good and we can put this job to rest. It seemed to drive just fine that way. It came out of the turns, and so I think I'm going to call this done at this point. There are other suspension parameters. Of course, you got the caster and the camber, and I do actually have camber bolts in this because I did lower it. But I think I'll do maybe that on another video. But for most people on these cars, the only thing that you really can mess with is toe-in, unless you start adding things like camber bolts or caster camber plates. But that's a whole nother thing. So anyway, we got the thing back in spec. It drives fine. So I think we'll just call it. Okay, so to wrap things up, I know this is fairly brief and not real in-depth. I mean, there's a lot that goes into suspension geometry. It's a science of all its own. And it's very complex. Some cars even have adjustments on the rear. So you would have to do a 4-wheel alignment, and that would be something completely different than what we're doing here, just messing with the toe-in. But anyway, we got it back into spec and it drives fine. I think the big takeaway message here is when you do take measurements, make sure that you actually drive it a little bit to allow that suspension to fully settle. Because just setting it down after it's been raised, the bushings get loaded and whatnot. I know the suspension comes back up and maybe camber will be okay. Maybe not, I don't even know about that. But anyway, you got to completely let the suspension relax before you take measurements. And I really think that's where a lot of these at-home alignments go awry. So anyway, with that said, I think we'll call our quits and I'll catch you on the next video.